How you doing? I'm Callan and this is Slapped Ham. Today we're talking about some unexplained historical events. From mysterious coffins moving on their own to ominous unexplained deaths. Join us as we take a look at 5 baffling events that remain unsolved. But before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button for more awesome creepy content just like this.
On December 26, 1900, relief workers arrived at the remote Flannan Isles lighthouse off the west coast of Scotland, only to discover that the lighthouse was deserted and its team nowhere to be found. Captain James Harvey and Joseph Moore, the replacement lighthouse keepers, searched the premises in the hopes of finding out what had happened to the missing lighthouse team, but there was no sign of lighthouse keepers Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur and James Ducat anywhere. When Joseph Moore rowed ashore and proceeded to climb the steep stairway to the lighthouse, he later reported that he had an overwhelming feeling of foreboding as he approached. Once he entered the lighthouse, Moore knew that something was amiss. The door was unlocked and half-eaten food was found on the table along with an overturned chair. 2 of the 3 coats that hung on the entry hall were missing. It seemed as if at least 2 of the lighthouse keepers had gotten up from the kitchen table and left in a hurry. The disappearance of the 3 men was reported and an investigation was soon underway. The final entries in the lighthouse logbook were particularly strange. Thomas Marshall wrote of unusually high winds. He went on to say that James Ducat, the chief lighthouse keeper, had been unusually quiet, and that William MacArthur, who was a seasoned mariner, had been crying about the storm. On December 13th, the log entry stated that the 3 men had been praying, apparently for relief from the storm. This was unusual because the 3 keepers were highly experienced and they were situated in a lighthouse that was 150 feet above sea level. To make matters even more unusual, there were no storms reported in the area at the time of the entries. The last log entry was made on December 15th and stated that the storm had ended and that God is over all. So what happened to the missing lighthouse team? There are numerous theories about what took place, including accidental drowning, ghostly attacks, sea monsters, as well as invasion and abduction by foreign spies. No bodies were ever found and the mystery remains unsolved. Starting in 1807, the Chase family vault, located in the Christchurch Parish Cemetery of Barbados, started exhibiting some very strange activity. Coffins began shifting about in the vault on their own with no apparent solution as to how this was happening. The vault itself was built out of blocks of coral and concrete with a massive marble slab to seal the entry, requiring 6 or 7 strong men to move it. It was purchased in 1808 by the Chase family. Only one person had been placed in the vault before the Chase family purchased it, and it was decided not to disturb the remains but instead leave them there where they were resting. In 1808, infant Mary Ann Maria Chase died and was interred in the vault within a lead casket. Tragically, Mary Ann's sister Dorcas died 4 years later. Just a month later, family patriarch Thomas Chase also died. Thomas Chase was placed in the vault along with his 2 daughters in 1812. It was when the vault was opened to inter Thomas Chase that the strange paranormal activity first became known. After the vault was opened, it was discovered that the coffins were in disarray, with the coffin of Dorcas upside down and on end, and Mary Ann's coffin against the wall. Nothing had been stolen and the bodies were intact. The family thought it was an act of vandalism and proceeded to put the heavy coffins in their appropriate resting places before sealing the vault with the marble slab. The family thought that was the end of it, but in 1816, 11-year-old Charles Ames died and arrangements for burial in the vault were made. Once again, when the vault was opened, the coffins were found in disarray, tossed haphazardly around the room. The entry to the vault showed no signs of tampering and, as before, nothing was stolen and the bodies were untouched. The family again moved the coffins to their original locations and resealed the vault. The vault was opened twice more, in 1816 to inter Samuel Brewster and in 1819 to inter Thomasina Clark. On both occasions, the coffins were found to have been thrown about. The only coffin left unscathed was that of Thomasina Goddard, the vault's original occupant. The strange phenomena came to the attention of Lord Combermere, the governor of Barbados, when he witnessed the strange activity during Clark's funeral. He had the vault thoroughly inspected before the coffins were returned to their proper resting places. White sand was then dusted onto the floor to capture any evidence of tampering. The entrance was then sealed shut with mortar, and the governor sealed the wet cement with his signet ring. 8 months later, the governor ordered the vault reopened to see if the extra measures had prevented the coffins from being disturbed. Once again, the coffins were tossed about, some with such force that there was damage to the coffins and the walls. The coffins of Thomas Chase actually blocked the entry and required several men to move it before entry could be gained. Strangely, the white sand on the floor remained undisturbed with no footprints at all, and the seal on the entrance was undamaged. Lord Cumbermere ordered the bodies in the tombs to be buried in other locations in the cemetery. The Chase family vault is still empty today. Many theories have been put forth about the mystery of the moving coffins. Seismic activity and flooding have been considered as possibilities, but both theories fall short. No concrete explanation has ever been put forth to explain the mysterious moving coffins of Barbados. Arguably one of the most well-documented paranormal cases in recent history, the story of Pennsylvania Rain Man Don Decker is both fascinating and frightening. Its credibility is supported by the eyewitness accounts of numerous credible witnesses, including several police officers. In Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania on February 24, 1983, Don Decker was granted furlough during a stay in jail to attend his grandfather's funeral. What many people didn't realise was that Decker's grandfather, James Keyshaw, had abused his grandson since he was a small boy. Don initially felt some peace. The man who had tormented him was finally gone, but his sense of peace would soon vanish as strange events began to unfold. After the funeral, Decker went to stay with family friends Bob and Jeannie Kiefer. Shortly after arriving at their home, Decker had a strange episode that included a deep chill and a trance-like state. Right away, the Kiefers noticed that something odd was going on, especially when they began to witness water suddenly dripping down the walls from the ceiling of their living room. As the volume of water began to intensify, Bob Kiefer decided to call the owner of the property, Ron Van Wy. Van Wy was stunned by what he saw. The drips were worsening, and they were now also coming up through the floor and flying sideways through the room. Van Wy knew that there was no water pipes in the areas the drips were originating from, and was at a loss as to what to do about the situation. Van Wy called the police, and soon patrolman Richard Walbert arrived on the scene along with a second officer, and both bore witness to the strange downpour in the living room of the Kiefers. As they tried to come to some sort of logical conclusion as to where the water was coming from, the officers took notice of Decker, who was still sitting in the living room in a trance-like state. They asked the Kiefers to escort Decker across the street to a nearby restaurant. As soon as Decker left the house, the downpour stopped, a connection that was immediately noticed by the officers and Van Wy. Inside the restaurant, the Kiefers sat Decker, still in his trance-like state, in a chair. Once again, water began to fall from the ceiling and spread across the floor. Restaurant owner Pam Scrofono, having witnessed the happenings at the home of the Kiefers, began to suspect that Decker might be possessed. She placed a crucifix on Decker, who immediately reacted as if he'd been burned. The Kiefers led Decker back to their home, carrying the rain with them. Things suddenly took a violent turn when Decker levitated off the ground and was slammed against the wall. Eventually, everything seemed to settle down and the rain ceased after Van Wy spent some time in prayer with Decker. After his furlough was over, Decker returned to jail. He soon began to wonder if he could control the appearance of the rain. Almost immediately, water began dripping from the walls and ceiling of his jail cell. Decker could call on the rain at will. A guard confronted Decker about the water in his cell. Decker, in turn, explained that he could make it rain. He soon found himself with a challenge: make it rain in the warden's office. When the guard went to see if the warden had experienced anything, he found him sitting in his office, a large area of his shirt saturated with water. Both Warden Keenold and the guard were understandably startled by this unusual display. Keenold called in Reverend William Blackburn to visit with Decker. After hearing Decker's story, the Reverend initially accused Decker of making everything up. Almost immediately, Decker's demeanour changed and his cell filled with a putrid smell. Once again, the rain returned. Reverend Blackburn spent several hours praying with Decker, and finally the rain stopped, leaving Decker in tears and exhausted. Decker never experienced the rain again. He attributed the strange phenomenon to a final act of abuse at the hands of his grandfather. On December 4th, 1872, Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia was informed by a seaman that a derelict vessel had been spotted just off the port bow west of Portugal. As they drew closer to the vessel, it was noted that only 3 of the ship's sails were actually set, with the remaining sails having been blown away or not raised. It was obvious that something was wrong, so Captain Morehouse sent 3 sailors to board the ship in an attempt to find out what had happened. As they drew closer, the sailors were able to see the name Mary Celeste, New York on the stern. It was noted that the ship had some damage, but overall she was completely functional. It was discovered that the lifeboat was missing along with the sextant, navigation book, chronometer and ship's register. The ship's steering compass, however, was discovered smashed. The last entry in the ship's log on November 25, 1872 stated that all was normal, and that the ship was nearing the Azores, roughly 6 miles from Santa Maria. A 6-month supply of food and water was discovered. The clothing of the crew and passengers was found to be stowed away in their lockers. After returning to the Dei Gratia, the investigators informed Captain Morehouse of the ship's identity and condition. Surprisingly, Morehouse knew the captain of the Mary Celeste, Captain Benjamin Spooner Biggs. He had dinner with Biggs and his wife just one day before the Mary Celeste set sail from New York City on November 5, 1872. The Biggses informed Morehouse that their 2-year-old daughter Sophia would be sailing with them. No sign of the crew or passengers of the Mary Celeste were ever found. Captain Morehouse split his crew in order to sail the Mary Celeste back to Gibraltar for salvage. There are many theories about what happened aboard the Mary Celeste. The most popular theories are mutiny, piracy, and even attacks by sea monsters or giant squids. Perhaps there was an unknown mechanical issue that caused the captain to abandon the ship. The mystery of the Mary Celeste remains unsolved. Before we get to that number 1 spot and take a look at what is surely one of the most perplexing events in recent history, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on channel notifications. That way you'll be up to date with all our latest content. On August 27, 1876, Rudolph Fentz disappeared without a trace while taking an evening stroll in New York City. A lone witness claimed to have seen Fentz vanish as he crossed a street in Longacre Square, now known as Times Square. Unfortunately, the witness was a known drunkard, so he was quickly discounted. Rudolph's family reported him missing, but they never saw him again. Now fast forward to 1950. A man in Victorian-era garments wearing mutton chop sideburns suddenly appeared in Times Square. Witnesses say that a gentleman seemed rather startled, and unfortunately he walked in front of a car and was struck and killed just a minute or so after his appearance. After arriving at the morgue, officials searched the clothing and body of the unknown man and found the following interesting items. A 5-cent beer token with the name of an unknown saloon, $70 in old banknotes, a bill for the care of a horse, as well as the cleansing of a carriage by a Lexington Avenue livery stable, and business cards with the name Rudolf Fentz along with a 5th Avenue address. None of the items showed any signs of aging. The New York Police Department attempted to identify the man using the items found on his body. The 5th Avenue address was now part of a business, and the livery stable and saloon couldn't be found in any public directory. There was also no record of Rudolf Fentz in any directory, nor were his fingerprints recorded. Rudolf Fentz Jr. was finally located in a 1939 phone book. Unfortunately, he had died 5 years earlier, but his widow was living in Florida. When contacted, Mrs. Fentz informed the police that her husband's father had disappeared at the age of 29 in 1876. So what is the truth behind the disappearance and reappearance of Rudolf Fentz? Was he an accidental time traveller, or was it something else altogether? There have been claims that the story was fiction, and that the story was printed in a Robert Heinlein science fiction anthology. However, no copies of the story have ever been found. Of further interest, in 2007, a researcher working for the Berlin News Archive found the story in an April 1951 edition, and it was essentially the same story as it's reported today. Other researchers have also found evidence of the existence of Rudolf Fentz, as well as his disappearance in 1876.
Well, that's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to slap that upward facing thumb because it lets us know you're enjoying the content. If you can't get enough of what we're doing, there's some embedded links there or playlist links in the description box below for you to binge on. And that's it for me. I'll see you all next time.